On the night of October 31st, 1978, the quiet streets of Haddonfield, Illinois, were lit by the flicker of jack-o'-lanterns and the laughter of children. By dawn, that small Midwestern town would be forever changed. What began as a typical Halloween evening descended into a night of unrelenting horror, a sequence of brutal murders that would become known as the Babysitter Murders. The events of that night have since been dissected, debated and mythologized. One fact remains: the man responsible vanished before authorities could bring him to justice. Decades later, his crimes continue to haunt Haddonfield, not just because of their savagery, because of what they represented: the intrusion of pure, motiveless evil into ordinary life. This is the story of the Halloween killings and the enduring mystery of what happened to the babysitter murderer. Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, where we dive deep into the unsolved, the unexplained and the downright unbelievable. My name is James, and today we're looking at the 1978 Babysitter Murders, where 4 people lost their lives and their killer fled into the night, leaving only a shadow and a legend behind. If you like this content and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe, like and share so we can give you more stories that will fascinate and terrify you. But for now, as we enter spooky season, this is the story of the Babysitter Murders. Even before it became synonymous with costumes and candy, Halloween was born out of something far older and darker. Its roots trace back over 2,000 years to the Celtic festival of Samhain, celebrated at the end of the harvest season. The Celts believed that on this night, the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin, allowing spirits to cross over into the mortal world. Fires were lit to ward off the restless dead, and disguises were worn to confuse malevolent entities. When Christianity spread throughout Europe, Samhain evolved into All Hallows' Eve, the night before All Saints' Day, a time meant to honour the faithful departed. The old traditions never truly died. They blended with the new faith, giving rise to the Halloween we know today, a strange fusion of reverence and revelry. By the 20th century, the holiday had crossed the Atlantic and become a staple of American life. In small towns like Haddonfield, Halloween was a night for innocent mischief, for trick-or-treaters, haunted houses, and laughter. But in 1978, that changed forever. The very night once meant to protect people from the spirits of the dead became the setting for one of the most chilling murder sprees in modern American history. And from that point on, Halloween, in Haddonfield and beyond, would never feel quite the same again. To really understand what happened on that fateful Halloween night, we must first rewind some 15 years. On October 31st, 1963, the Myers family home in Haddonfield, Illinois, was alive with the sounds of Halloween: distant laughter from trick-or-treaters, the rustle of autumn leaves against the windows, and upstairs, the faint hum of transistor radio. Judith Myers, 17 years old, was doing what most teenagers did on that night. She'd handed out candy, gone upstairs very briefly with her boyfriend, and probably thought little of her quiet 6-year-old brother waiting somewhere downstairs in his clown costume. Judith was bright, rebellious in that harmless teenage way, and by all accounts a caring sister. No one would have guessed that, before the night was over, she'd become the first victim in one of the most infamous crimes in Illinois history. At around 10 p.m, Judith's boyfriend left the house. Minutes later, Michael Myers, her 6-year-old brother, crept up the stairs, a kitchen knife in his hand and a mask covering his small face. What followed lasted less than a minute, a flurry of violence so sudden and cold it stunned even seasoned investigators. When police arrived, they found Judith lifeless on the bedroom floor, stabbed repeatedly. Downstairs, Michael stood outside, still clutching the bloodied knife, his expression calm, almost blank. Neighbours recall the eerie quiet that followed. No screaming, no crying, just silence. When Michael's parents returned, they'd found their son waiting for them on the front lawn, as though nothing had happened. That image, a small boy in a clown mask holding a knife, would haunt Haddonfield forever. Michael was immediately taken into custody and transferred to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, where he would remain for the next 15 years. He was placed under the care of Dr. Samuel Loomis, a psychiatrist, who would become both his caretaker and his most persistent adversary. Loomis quickly realised that Michael wasn't just disturbed. He was something quite different altogether. "I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face," Loomis would later say, "and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes." In the years that followed, Michael never spoke another word. He didn't react to stimuli, didn't respond to therapy, didn't show any emotion of any kind. Nurses reported unsettling incidents, Michael standing motionless in corners for hours, sudden bursts of violence, drawings filled with masks and knives. Dr. Loomis came to believe Michael was not insane in the traditional sense. He wasn't delusional or psychotic. He was simply evil. Pure, quiet, and patient. Evil. Then, on the rainy night of October 30th, 1978, during a routine transfer, that evil slipped free. As Loomis and a nurse arrived at the sanitarium, they saw patients wandering the grounds in the dark, the gates open, the guards missing. Michael Myers would escape, stealing Loomis's car and disappearing into the night. The next day was Halloween, and Haddonfield had no idea that the boy who murdered his sister 15 years earlier was coming home. October 30th, 1978, the day before Halloween. A cold rain swept through the Illinois countryside as Dr. Samuel Loomis drove towards Smith's Grove Sanitarium, unaware that the patient he'd spent 15 years trying to contain was about to vanish into the night. Michael Myers had been locked away since 1963, after murdering his sister Judith at the age of 6. For a decade and a half, he'd barely spoken a word, silent, unblinking, seemingly hollow. To Loomis, Michael wasn't simply insane, he was evil itself. He warned anyone who would listen that Myers was beyond rehabilitation, but by the late 1970s, budget cuts and bureaucracy ruled mental health care, and Michael was due for a court appearance in Haddonfield. As Loomis and nurse Marion Chambers drove up to the facility that night, they noticed something strange. Patients wandering the ground in their hospital gowns, ghostly silhouettes against the rain. Loomis stopped the car to see. Something had gone terribly wrong. Then, from the darkness, a figure climbed onto the vehicle. There was shouting, glass shattering, and chaos. Nurse Chambers was thrown from the car. By the time Loomis reached her, it was too late. The state car was speeding off into the night. Michael Myers was now free. The following morning, near the rural town of Loom Lake, some 73 miles from Haddonfield, an abandoned truck belonging to a local mechanic was discovered. The truck's driver, a man named Joseph Phelps, was found nearby in the brush, stripped of his coveralls, his body showing signs of a violent attack. He'd been strangled and beaten around the head with his own wrench, which was found covered in blood nearby. From that moment on, the trail went cold. Michael was on the move, dressed now in the mechanic's dark blue uniform. To anyone passing by, he would have seemed just like another man walking alone on the roadside. Dr. Loomis knew better. He was already back in Haddonfield by then, warning the sheriff and anyone else who would listen that evil had returned home. Nobody believed him. But having visited Judith Myers' grave in Haddonfield Cemetery, he'd already discovered that a headstone had been removed. A sick joke by local kids? Or had Michael been there already? At around 4:14 p.m, the alarm bell at Nichols' hardware store rang out, signalling a break-in. The store had closed early that day due to a family emergency, and somebody had broken in, taking a Halloween mask, some rope, and a couple of knives. Police put this down to local miscreants causing trouble on Halloween, but as the day wore on, it would be evidence that the stolen loot would be used for more than just high jinks. By the time the sun set on October 31st, Michael had been missing for nearly 24 hours. Somewhere out there, silent, methodical, and unstoppable, he was preparing to kill again. The residents of Haddonfield had no idea that the shadows creeping between their pumpkins and porch lights weren't just kids playing dress-up. The shape, as Loomis called him, had come home. To understand the events that unfolded in Haddonfield on Halloween night in 1978, you first have to understand the people who became part of it. Ordinary young people living in an ordinary small town. The kind of people you'd never expect to end up in a police report, let alone a national headline. Laurie Strode was 17 years old, quiet and studious. The kind of teenager who babysat for extra money and always remembered to lock the door behind her. She wasn't rebellious like some of her friends. She was grounded, cautious, the sensible one. Her friends teased her for being too good, but that sense of responsibility would later save her life. Laurie's circle included Annie Brackett and Linda van der Klok, both typical small-town girls, each with plans for the future. Annie was the daughter of Sheriff Lee Brackett, which added a touch of irony to what would follow. She was witty, confident, and endlessly sarcastic, the kind of person who filled any silence. Linda, meanwhile, was the cheerful and carefree one, the captain of the cheerleading squad. Her biggest concern that Halloween night was finding time to meet her boyfriend Bob Sims before curfew. Their plans were simple enough that night: to babysit, to hang out, and maybe sneak in a beer or two once the kids went to sleep. No one in Haddonfield suspected anything sinister was about to happen. After all, this was a safe place, the kind of town where people didn't lock their doors and kids roamed freely after dark. But something else was moving through the quiet streets that night. Something wearing a pale, expressionless mask. As Laurie walked to school that morning, she noticed a car slowly trailing her, an old station wagon with medical markings on the side. She thought this peculiar, but didn't overly worry. Throughout the day, she glimpsed the same figure standing in the distance, a man in a white mask, silent and still, just watching. Every time she looked, though, he was gone. While Laurie tried to dismiss it as nerves or coincidence, Dr. Loomis was racing back to Haddonfield, knowing exactly who that figure was. He'd warned Sheriff Brackett that death had come to his little town. Few took him seriously. The idea that the 6-year-old who'd murdered his sister 15 years before could have returned home felt absurd, like a ghost story meant to scare kids. As night fell, Laurie headed to babysit young Tommy Doyle, while Annie looked after Lindsay Wallace just across the street. It was a night like any other: popcorn, TV, and phone calls between friends. Until one by one, those calls went silent. The next few hours would turn their quiet suburban street into a scene of unimaginable horror. By morning, 2 families would awake to tragedy. One survivor would be forever changed, and the world would come to know a name that still sends chills down the spine: Michael Myers. Laurie Strode didn't set out to be a hero. On that Halloween night, survival became her only choice. For most people in the quiet Illinois town of Haddonfield, it was a night like any other. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed from porch steps, children ran door to door shouting trick or treat, and the small community settled into that familiar suburban calm. But for one 17-year-old babysitter named Laurie Strode, it would become the longest and most terrifying night of her life. Laurie's day began like any other. She was the responsible one amongst her friends, quiet, studious, and dependable. That Halloween, she was set to babysit a young boy named Tommy Doyle, while her more carefree friends Annie Brackett and Linda van der Klok had their other plans. But as dusk fell, Michael was already there, watching from the shadows. He spent the day stalking Laurie. Her father was a local real estate agent, and that morning he'd entrusted his daughter to place the keys to the old Myers house under the porch mat in preparation for the arrival of prospective buyers. This is where it is believed that Michael first laid eyes on Laurie. From there, it is thought that he began stalking her, to her school, to her home, and finally to the Doyle residence. At one point, he even stood outside the schoolyard watching her from his car, a blank white mask gazing through the glass. Several townspeople reported seeing a tall man in overalls and a pale mask lurking behind hedges and trees. But Haddonfield wasn't used to fear. "It's Halloween," Sheriff Brackett had told his daughter, "and everyone's entitled to one good scare." But by nightfall, the scare became something else entirely. Michael's first confirmed victim that evening was Annie Brackett, Laurie's best friend. Annie had been babysitting across the street from Laurie, caring for a girl named Lindsay Wallace. When Annie's boyfriend called, she decided to drop Lindsay off with Laurie so she could meet him. As Annie left the Wallace house, she never noticed the shape moving silently behind her. The door was locked, so she went back for the keys. When she returned and climbed inside, Michael emerged from the back seat. There was a brief struggle, a strangled cry, the flash of a knife, and then silence. Her body was later found laid across the bed in the Wallace home, posed beneath Judith Myers' stolen tombstone. a twisted tribute from Michael to his first victim 15 years earlier. Just a few moments later, Linda and her boyfriend Bob Sims arrived at the same house, unaware of the horror inside. After the two went upstairs, Michael struck again, this time killing Bob with brute strength, before strangling Linda with a phone cord. Her final gasps were heard on the other end of the line by Laurie, who mistook the noise for a prank. The killing of Bob showed exactly the pure, unadulterated rage inside of Michael that night. When detectives investigated the crime scene, they discovered he was killed with a single knife blow to the chest. What makes it more unnerving was that the wound had been so deep that it had actually penetrated his chest and exited through his back. Moreover, police found a deep knife mark in the kitchen wall, with Bob's blood marked into the wood. Placement of the strike into the wall, when matched with the wounds on the body, suggested that the killer had held the victim by the neck, lifting him off the ground, before impaling him with the final fatal blow. 3 of Laurie's friends were dead within an hour. Concerned by the strange phone call from Linda and the silence from Annie, Laurie crossed the street to check on her friends. The lights were out, and the air felt wrong. Inside, she found the bodies. Annie on the bed, Judith's tombstone looming over her, Bob hanging from the closet door, and Linda lifeless nearby. Then came the moment that would define her life. From the shadows behind her, Michael emerged, the same emotionless white mask, the same dark eyes that had watched her all day. Laurie screamed and ran, throwing herself from down the stairs and forcing her way out of the kitchen, limping back to the Doyle house as Michael followed without a sound. A neighbour, Mrs. Elrod, heard her screams, and the young girl actually hammered on her door looking frantically for help, but Mrs. Elrod didn't answer. Talking to the press later, she stated that she thought it was the neighbourhood youths playing pranks, and the fact that she didn't help Laurie on that night stayed with her for the rest of her days. Laurie locked the doors, told Tommy to hide, and tried to calm her shaking hands. But Michael was relentless. He broke through the door, shattered the closet, stabbing through walls, each movement deliberate, mechanical, and unstoppable. Laurie fought back with sheer will, using knitting needles, a coat hanger, anything she could grab. For a moment, she thought she'd killed him with his own knife. When she turned her back, he rose again. It wasn't until Dr. Loomis arrived, guided by instinct and horror, that the nightmare paused. He burst into the Doyle house just as Michael lunged at Laurie once more, and fired 6 bullets into the killer's chest. Michael staggered backwards, fell through the balcony railing, and hit the ground below. But when Loomis looked again, Michael was gone. By dawn, Haddonfield police had secured the Doyle and Wallace houses. Reporters arrived, cordons were set up, and a stunned community tried to understand what had happened. 3 young people, Annie, Bob and Linda, plus Joseph Phelps, now confirmed to be Michael's first victim, were all pronounced dead. Laurie Strode was hospitalised for shock and minor injuries. Dr. Loomis told investigators the same thing he'd been saying for years. "I shot him 6 times, he repeated. Michael Myers is not human. He is pure evil. But as the sun rose over the quiet town, Michael Myers had vanished. The blood trail stopped at the backyard fence. No witnesses, no prints, no sightings. Search parties combed nearby woods, hospitals and back roads, but found nothing. Some locals claimed to see a man in a white mask watching from the tree line. Others said they heard heavy breathing over their baby monitors that night, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. The murders became known as the Babysitter Killings. Haddonfield's children grew up being warned to stay inside every Halloween night. The old Myers house was abandoned, then burned, then rebuilt. But still people whispered, because evil doesn't die, it just waits. Over the decades that followed, sightings of Michael Myers were reported across Illinois and beyond. A gas station attendant outside Russellville claimed he saw a tall man in overalls buying fuel, his face hidden behind a mask. Another report from Kentucky described a hitchhiker who matched Michael's description, silent, broad-shouldered, carrying a kitchen knife wrapped in a cloth. But nothing was ever proven. Some said Michael returned to Haddonfield every Halloween, blending into the costumed crowds before disappearing again at dawn. Others believed he died of his injuries that night, buried in an unmarked grave somewhere near Smith's Grove. Laurie Strode never publicly spoke about that night again. Rumours swirl to this day about what happened to her on various Reddit forums and internet sites. Some claim she died in a car accident not long after, while others say she changed her identity and moved to California to work as a teacher. Certain internet sleuths claim to have tracked her down to a profile on X, where the user is known to often rant about trauma and being thoroughly unpleasant. None of these rumours have ever been proven to be true. As for Dr. Loomis, he retired from practice soon after and authored several books about the night of Michael's great escape, including the best-selling You Only Live Twice: How the Babysitter Murderer Still Haunts America. His obsession led to his descent into alcoholism, and he passed away in 1995. And as for Haddonfield, Halloween would never be the same again. Even decades later, the legend of Michael Myers still hangs over Haddonfield like smoke after a fire, something you can't quite see, but you can still smell. What began as a single night of unimaginable horror has grown into one of America's most persistent unsolved mysteries. And, as with any mystery that refuses to rest, theories have filled the silence. The most credible explanation is also the simplest. Michael Myers survived. Despite being shot 6 times by Dr. Loomis and falling from the second-story balcony of the Doyle residence, no body was ever recovered. Officers found no trace of blood leading away from the scene, no footprints, no drag marks, just the imprint of his body on the grass and the sound of distant wind chimes. Over the years, alleged sightings have trickled in from all over the Midwest. A silent figure walking outside Haddonfield Memorial Hospital in 1981. A masked man staring, spotted at a roadside mechanics store in 1988. A shape watching from the edge of children's Halloween parades in 1995. None ever verified. The question remains, did he live? Or did the idea of him simply refuse to die? Then there's the rumour that turned a local tragedy into something deeply personal. The claim that survivor Laurie Strode was actually Michael Myers' sister. The story goes that Laurie was adopted as a baby after their parents' deaths. Her identity changed to protect her from being the stigma of being the other Myers child. Those who support the theory point to Michael's apparent obsession with Laurie that night, how he seemed to stalk her specifically, bypassing others in his path. Some say the motive wasn't random evil at all, but unfinished business. Of course, no adoption record has ever surfaced, and Laurie herself never commented. Those close to the story insisted she was just an ordinary high school student caught in extraordinary nightmare. To those who believe in blood curses and generational evil, the story fits a little too well. Another popular and far stranger theory suggests that Michael wasn't simply a murderer, but part of something ritualistic. Investigators who re-entered the abandoned Myers house years later reportedly found carvings in the basement walls, strange Celtic symbols linked to Samhain, the ancient festival that gave rise to Halloween. Internet investigators argue that Michael's killings coincided with the traditional Samhain calendar, suggesting the murders were part of a pagan sacrifice cycle meant to feed an ancient darkness. It's the kind of theory that would sound absurd anywhere else, but in Haddonfield, people don't laugh it off quite so easily. Also, because no legend is complete without conspiracy, some believe that Michael was eventually captured and silenced. Supposedly, government agents sealed his psychiatric records, and a mysterious federal transfer order appeared in 1982 under the initials MM. Story goes that he was taken into a secret facility for psychological study, the perfect emotionless killer, a government-made ghost. There's zero proof, of course, but like all conspiracies, it thrives because the truth is just empty enough to make room for it. Finally, the most unsettling theory, the one even Dr. Loomis himself hinted at, that Michael Myers was never entirely human. Some say he was a vessel for something ancient, a force that possesses and discards hosts like masks. That would explain his silence, his strength, and why bullets didn't stop him. If true, then Michael didn't just vanish into the night, he simply moved on, perhaps into another town, under another name, and another mask. The reality may be even far simpler. Myers may have died that night. The chaos and the panic could easily have destroyed evidence or hidden his remains. The human mind hates loose ends. It wants shape in the shadows and meaning in the noise. So every Halloween, when someone swears they saw a man standing by the hedges in a white mask, people don't question it, because deep down, They know one thing. In Haddonfield, evil never dies. More than 4 decades have passed since that night in Haddonfield, yet the story of Michael Myers continues to haunt. The terror, the unanswered questions, and the scars left on survivors like Laurie Strode have cemented the events of October 31st, 1978 as more than a local tragedy. It has become a national obsession. What makes this case so chilling is not just the violence, but the uncertainty. Michael's escape, the possibility of his continued existence, and the rumours surrounding Laurie's identity and the nature of his crimes have allowed fear to persist long after the bloodshed has ended. Families and residents of Haddonfield were never given closure, and the legend of the Babysitter Murderer became a grim reminder of the fragility of safety. While some explanations lean towards the supernatural, ritualistic, or conspiratorial, the most likely reality is rooted in the tangible. A disturbed young man who committed unthinkable acts and whose fate after that night remains unknown. Haddonfield may have healed physically. The psychological shadow lingers. Halloween will never just be holiday there. It's a commemoration of lost innocence, the randomness of violence, and the enduring mystery of Michael Myers. A story that may never end. Thank you for watching this episode of Echoes of the Unknown, one of the more chilling cases we've covered thus far. One for the season as well, with Halloween just around the corner. So what do you think happened to the killer? What happened to Laurie? Was Dr. Loomis right all along? Pop your thoughts in the comments below. I've got loads of strange and unnerving cases coming up. There's one about a boy who drowned in a lake in 1957. He's been thought to have left a curse on the area ever since. There's also the story of a real-life exorcism in Washington in the early 70s. So if you want to know more about stories like that, remember to subscribe. Give the like button a good old fiddle and give the bell a bit of a tinkle for notifications. I'll be back soon, so enjoy spooky season. And also remember, until next time, keep listening for the echoes.